Today I'll be talking about using customer journey mapping to design the perfect SaaS onboarding. So last week we hosted Yuri from UXpressia. He spoke about creating customer journey maps to our users and our audience. So today I joined you to kind of follow up on that talk and talk about how you can actually use your customer journey map to improve your different product metrics. So again, the pirate metrics, even though I'm not as well prepared as Yuri, I didn't bring a pirate blindfold and I didn't bring a parrot with me. So sorry for that, but I hope you will still find it useful. Right, so a quick agenda. What is customer journey mapping or user journey mapping? I will just make a quick recap. Why is it important for user onboarding and what problems can it solve for you when you're designing your user onboarding, right? And what are the goals of user onboarding? So what you can actually achieve at the different stages, what metrics you can improve at the different stages of your customer journey, and how to improve these metrics with your onboarding using your customer journey map. Right. And of course, I will show you how to build them with Userpilot. But a few things maybe about myself, and then I will ask you a few questions. You can start typing in the chat. I would love to know how many of you here are building a SaaS business or working for a SaaS business. How many of you are working in product management and product marketing, especially? So pop that in the chat. And a few words about myself. As Yulia already mentioned, I kind of hail from a product startup background. A couple of years ago, I kind of started as a content marketer in an agency that was servicing a lot of SaaS businesses. And I just became fascinated with the business model. So I thought, I'm going to make my own. And I started with basically location business customer app in China that was supposed to connect local business owners and event venues with expats who do not speak Mandarin. That kind of didn't work out that well as we thought. We built the product, I learned a ton, but then after about a year, we decided to sell the app and I decided I've had enough of China, moving back to Europe. Cut the long story short, I was looking for another product SaaS business I could join as a co-founder, and that's how I stumbled upon Postfity, which was a social media scheduler and which I'm going to feature a lot in our talk. That was a small bootstrapped team. I'm still like very close to them. And, at some point I was at a conference and I met guys from Userpilot. And we started kind of doing some small projects together, and here we are, fast forward 2 years, and I'm basically heading marketing at Userpilot. How did that happen? So that's about me. I'm based in London. Any people from London here, let me know. I would love to grab a beer with you or a coffee once the lockdown ends. I think we all need more human interactions. I'm a runner. I'm a big fan of emojis, as you will notice from the presentation, and I have the PowerPoint skills of a 4-year-old, so I'm sorry if it doesn't look perfect, but yeah. Okay, so who are you? Let me look at the chat. I'm always like struggling with Zoom because there are so many windows that are covering my screen. And cool. UX audits. Oh, Yuri's here. Brilliant. Okay. Customer success lead. Yeah, we have a lot of customer success people using Userpilot. It's a pretty diverse tool. You can just build whatever you want, right? It doesn't need to be just onboarding. UX designer. Who else is with us? Product marketer. There is a product marketer. Brilliant. Customer intelligent analyst, UX researcher. A lot of UX people, expectedly. Great. So, I mean, if you're in UX design or UX research, what you will see can be, you don't need to use Userpilot to kind of use it as an inspiration. You can use any other tool or just custom code these things, these experiences yourself, but this will be just kind of high level ideas you can use. Okay, I'm going to close the chat and move on now. So, as you may remember from the agenda, let's start from what is customer or user journey mapping. So I found this definition from Salesforce pretty useful. So basically, it's a process of creating the map of your user journey, kind of a visual story, how the customers interact with your brand. And that includes all the touch points, emotions, problems they are experiencing, and the different goals they have at the different stages of their journey. Right, so it allows you to see basically your business from your customer's perspective. This is an example that I stole from you guys at Uxpressia. As you may see, it's an example of how this customer journey map looks like. And unfortunately, if it wasn't for Corona, we could all see it on a pretty nice big screen. Now we have to sort of squint to see what's written there. So the problem with customer journey maps is that they're usually huge, right? So you have the user persona on top, you have the user goals, you have the kind of the storyboard, processes and channels, then the experience of the user, the problems that the user experiences at different stages of the user journey, and the ideas that they can have, also the ideas you can have to solve their problems. And I will be like zooming in on the specific parts, so don't worry if you can't see everything here. Right, this is something that I have kind of rewritten based on the customer journey map template. So you can do it very simply, right? So kind of horizontally, you see the different stages of the user journey, right? And vertically in the first row, you of course need to put your persona. And this may be a bit tricky because you can't actually put all your personas effectively on one customer journey map. I mean, you could try, but that would be like a huge map and a massive project that wouldn't make it very visible. So I would suggest if your SaaS product services or caters to several different personas, you may want to create a different map for every persona, because after all, like let's take an example of Userpilot. We are catering to both product managers or product marketers who want to improve product metrics through building experiences and experiments for the users. But we are also catering to, for instance, customer success people who want to offer self-serve support and actually reduce the number of support tickets. Right? So these two personas in our case will have a completely different journey, different experience with the tool, different touch points with our company, also different problems and emotions. So we need to always remember about this. Moving on, I'm focusing again on the horizontal axis, so the stages of the user journey, plus the metrics that you want to measure and ultimately improve or affect at each stage. So I like to represent the user journey as a flywheel, right? With like the different experiences and different basically touch points happening. So all your users will sort of fall into this flywheel and ultimately, hopefully, if you don't lose them on the way, come out as advocates or power users. That's the ultimate goal for you. The pirate metrics, we probably all know. Gosh, I need to move one slide back. I misclicked here. So acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. We will be looking at these metrics across the user journey and how these experiences we will be building are going to affect these metrics. How many of you are familiar with pirate metrics? Let me know in the chat. Is that a concept that is like familiar? Are you using them actively? Right, not familiar. Okay. Never heard of them. Separately. Cool. Right, so they're often called pirate metrics because when you look at the first letter, it's AARRR, so it's like R, right? But basically, these are the ways how you can measure success at every stage of the user journey for your company and in a sense for the user as well. Right. Let's move on. So the vertical axis of the customer journey map usually includes the elements that I mentioned already. So the persona, goals of the persona. This is a super important point, right? And I like to say that the common mistake people make creating user personas and user journey maps as well is that they focus on the demographic features, right? So say my target user, Margaret, she's a 40-year-old mother of 2, and she is a marketing manager who likes gardening, right? So there are a lot of these unnecessary demographic features because like actually if she was, you know, a 25-year-old marketing manager, right, who likes video games, like how would that change the goal they have at a specific you know, point in their user journey and at a specific point in their interaction, in their experience with your company? It wouldn't really matter. So the goals, the jobs that need to be done, so the jobs to be done framework is actually the most important part in my mind in creating your user persona. Then we have the touch points, so how your user interacts with your company and the product, and experiences, what they are feeling. And this is something that we are going to try to influence in onboarding, right? And onboarding experiences. I will explain the common myths because probably when you hear the word onboarding, you think only about the new users, right? New user onboarding. It's like a common collocation, but actually onboarding happens at every stage of the user journey. You can onboard an advanced user on the new features, right? Or even more advanced features. So it's not like it stops after somebody has had 10 web sessions in your product. Problems and emotions. This is also something that we will try to influence with our experiences today. Okay, so what are the goals of customer journey mapping? We are trying to understand the user journey for each customer persona better, understand the touch points with our company, understand the goals. This is something I kind of harped on about, right? Basically, we want to understand what each user is hiring our product for at each stage of their user journey. And this may change, even for the same user persona, even for the same individual user, the goals they want to achieve with your product may be completely different at the different stages of the user journey. So that's why it's so important to spend some time on this map before you start creating product experiences, because otherwise the experiences just will not be relevant and will not be timely. So you may end up showing things to the wrong person or at the wrong time. And of course, to understand the experience of our users, so how these goals they are coming to your product with are met. Okay, why do you need customer journey map for user onboarding? I already kind of gave you a hint, but what are the common myths around SaaS user onboarding? Any ideas? I already mentioned one. Anything that you associate with user onboarding? What comes to your mind when you hear SaaS user onboarding? Once it's okay. Yeah, Magali, that's actually spot on. You mentioned 2 of the myths that I'm going to bring up in one. Anyone else? Any ideas? The user onboarding is the customer the user of the onboarding is the customer. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it doesn't need to be. Sometimes in onboarding, it prevents users from trying out the product right away instead of letting them look around in the system freely. Oh, Randy, you're probably talking about product tours. I personally absolutely hate product tours because they want me to do step 4 before I have even taken step 1. I have a great GIF that is showing this product tour from Intercom, and it's just not doing the job because yeah, you know, I'm the last person to read instructions. I would rather you know, press all the buttons myself to see how it works, to understand where the product falls short to address the issue. Right, so oops, oh, gosh. Yeah, I am not a big fan of Zoom. Right, so for me, the most important myths that usually cause new user or like generally SaaS user onboarding to fail is that onboarding is only for new users, something I already mentioned. And then once your user becomes activated, you kind of leave them to their own devices and they never see you again. And then they may struggle with some more advanced features. They may never discover your more advanced features, or they may gradually become disengaged because you're not showing them that there is more value to your product, right? Also, when you're launching new features, you need to think how you're going to implement them into your evergreen onboarding. So the new users who will be joining your product weeks or months after the feature release will still have the opportunity to learn about this new feature, right? You're not going to be sending feature releases emails to new users like, you know, 10 months after the feature has been released. It doesn't make sense. Then the second myth is that you can do one size fits all. So a lot of smaller SaaS businesses that basically don't have the resources, the time, the people to sit down, do this proper customer journey mapping for every user persona. They kind of slap this generic product store on top of their UI, and they subject everyone to the same, you know, the same journey, which is in some cases, in the cases of some tools where your users may have completely different goals, actually very relevant and distracting and frustrating. Let me give you an example of this. Imagine an email marketing tool, right? And what kind of personas can you have for an email marketing tool? You know, one used for sending newsletters. What kind of personas can you have for that? Like, any ideas in the chat? Think about it for a moment. So for instance, you can have, there are some answers, email marketing. Yeah, but what do they want to do? What are their goals? What are the jobs they want to get done? So imagine someone who's completely new to email marketing, right? Let's say a person who is just setting up their own blog and they want to create a subscription form and collect some subscribers, right? And they've never done any email marketing at all, right? You will need to direct that person to a completely different part of your tool than a person who's an email marketing pro. And for instance, they are moving from another product because it didn't meet their expectations, right? So, you know, it often happens that your SaaS business will have these two completely diverse personas. So if you have a completely new user who has never used an email marketing tool before, in that case, you will want to show them how to create a subscription form, right? And then how to start collecting subscribers, right? If somebody moves to you from a different tool and they are bringing in an email list already, the first thing you want to show them is how to upload their email list, right? So the first touch points will be completely different for these two personas. These are the so-called key activation points. And that's why it's so important to actually think about the journey, right, before you create any onboarding experiences, and make sure you know whom you're showing the experiences to. Then the last common myth that I wanted to discuss here is that you can set it and forget it. So this is something that has already been mentioned by some of you here. So onboarding is not something you do once. Your UI changes, your users may be changing, you may be going up market, right? You may be servicing or catering to new personas, you know, say a year or two down the road. And also, you may want to check if your onboarding experiences are still up to date and if they are still working, right? These AR metrics, I can't pronounce that, are basically important because they give you an idea how well you are doing at activating your users and making them engage with your features, at making them stay, at making them refer your product to new users. So basically, if you have the time and resources, onboarding can be pretty much a full-time job. Okay. So these things are obviously wrong. Right, so how can a customer journey map help you create and optimize each onboarding experience? So it can help you find the right user and help them hit the right goals at the right time, intentionally improve the metrics you want to improve over time with small steps. And I will show you basically how to do it without coding, but of course, if you have the resources to code, you can do it yourself. And Zoom is really getting in my hair now. What are the goals of user onboarding, right? Let me know what you think. We already mentioned some. This is kind of reinforcing. Understand what's new, reaching the aha moment. Great, Luigi. So we are speaking the same language. Aha moment is the moment when the user realizes the value of your product. Realizing time to value or reducing time to value, right? Increasing conversion rate, creating an account, and lower the cost of customer support. Right, you're getting it. And that's also why Userpilot has so many different personas as their users. You can do a lot of things with onboarding. Right, saying that the tool really has all the features they needed before the trial is up, increasing consumption, adoption, engagement. You seem to be real experts at this. So I think I need to like breeze through the presentation quickly. Cool. So there are two ways to look at it when it comes to the goals of user onboarding. You can look at your business goals, right? So you mentioned a lot of different business goals, and I decided to tie them to the different pirate metrics. Hello? Oh, sorry. No, I did it again. Okay. Right, but you know, the different goals can be adjusted if you have a problem with high, say, support cost and a lot of people writing to your support. This may be your main business objective, of course. Right, and you know, the sweet spot where you want to be is where you hit your business goals and at the same time, your user hits their goals at each stage of the user journey, right? So this is exactly what you want to find out from your customer journey map. And this is how it can help you visualize these goals. Okay, so let's take an example. How customer journey map can be used to improve onboarding. So I'll take the example of Postfity, so the social media scheduler that I have been working on for about 2 years. So a social media scheduler is a tool, you may be familiar with it, like Buffer or Hootsuite, that allows the users to plan their posts to different social media and push them to a number of platforms at the same time. And again, there are different types of users that can use a tool like that. It can be a solopreneur who is basically marketing for their own business, but it can be also a marketer at an agency, or it can be a virtual assistant servicing a number of different clients. It can be a virtual assistant who only specializes, for instance, in Instagram, and they will have only Instagram accounts linked, right? So this creates challenges in creating the onboarding that would basically help everyone, right? And that would, in the sense, be useful for all these different personas. So where do we start, right? We need to create the customer journey maps for all the different personas. So I took a solopreneur. I could, of course, break it down further and say, right, so this solopreneur is, only needs the scheduler for LinkedIn and Facebook. So I'm going to leave out all the features that are related to Instagram and Twitter, for instance, right? What are the goals that they have? The goals will be different, as we mentioned, at all the stages of their user journey. So, maybe at the acquisition stage, they want to find the cheapest social media scheduling tool, right? At the activation stage, they want to connect their social media accounts and schedule their first posts. So these are, like the aha moments or key activation points, right? Then when they are basic user, they want to schedule as many posts as possible in the shortest time effectively, right? And then as they move on in their user journey, they want to say optimize their experience. They want to do things faster. Maybe they want to upload hundreds of posts at once. Maybe they want to start using videos as well, or maybe they want to automate adding hashtags to their posts, right? These are all the things that we need to consider when we plan the onboarding experience for this specific user. So we show them the right features at what we think is the right time for them. Of course, it takes a little bit of guesswork, right? But essentially, this is a good start for us. We need to make some assumptions after all. So yeah, then obviously we're looking at the touch points, how they're interacting with our tool at each of these stages, what experiences they have, what problems they're encountering, what emotions they have, and then what onboarding UI patterns can we use to help them reach their goals at every stage. Moving on, this is basically what I have just shown to you. And I will give you an example of basically these onboarding UI patterns that we applied to this persona at every stage of their user journey. Right, so first of all, when we have the new, I'm going to leave the acquisition stage, right? Because what I wanted to talk about today is mostly the post sign-up experiences, which is something that you can build in Userpilot, right? It's not a tool you can use to change your, say, checkout page, right? Or your sign-up flow. But after the user has actually signed up, so at the activation stage, this is where you can build these UI patterns. So the first UI pattern I would build is a welcome screen with a micro survey, because how do I actually know, who the user is, that they are a solopreneur, that they have these and these goals. I can't know that just from, say, Google Analytics or HubSpot or, another tool that would allow you to trace the user journey. You could sort of make certain assumptions. So for instance, if you're using HubSpot, you can see which posts your user has visited, right, before signing up, which helps you, kind of make sense of what they were looking for, what keywords they were looking for, right, and what possible problems they are trying to solve. But, if you're not sure, the most effective way of communicating what you want to find out is just asking questions. So keep it short and sweet. And this is where you also need to think really hard what questions to ask, because people get tired of filling in surveys that are long very quickly. You may want to gamify this experience. So for instance, I could try a bit harder, and instead of making these regular radio buttons, I could, for instance, create avatars that represent these personas and let them click on the right avatar, choose their, persona, choose their hero, we could gamify it. I know that the room is probably divided. There will be people here who hate gamification and who love gamification. There will be people who find it patronizing and who find it fun. You need to decide what is your brand voice and what is good for you. I've seen some really cool examples of welcome screens that kind of tried to make it fun, and like, what adventure are you going on, for instance. This would help you understand what the user is trying to achieve. Good. So once the user has actually told you what they are trying to do and who they are, you tie a different experience to each of these buttons. So what happens at the back end here is that we have a custom event that is triggered, right? In that case, it's not really a custom event because it's not something the user has done yet, it's an attribute, right? So by the response, we segment the users into different groups, right? And then we start showing them different experiences, right? So for a new user that is just starting out in here, the first key activation point they need to go through is, of course, connecting their social media accounts, right? You can't post to social media if you don't have any accounts connected. So that order is really, really important, right? So after they have pressed got it, they go to their social media profile, they link it. And when they have linked it, we then trigger this custom event. So we know that the user has actually linked the account, and we don't show them anything else until they have done that, because it doesn't make sense to ask them to write their first post before they have linked their accounts, because they would have nowhere to post it to. And this is exactly the example I brought up with newsletters, right? If you have a new user who doesn't have any subscribers, you can't tell them to create their first newsletter. It just doesn't make any sense, right? You need to know who they are, what stage they are at, and then direct them to the right place. So this is what happens here. So after we have this custom event, we know that they have connected their accounts. We only then ask them to write their first post. Right, and how does that look? We can see basically the impact of our experience by running A/B tests. So we are choosing a treatment group, we are operationalizing activation points, right? As we want the user ultimately, after the user onboarding, to schedule their first post. And then we check if the experience we created leads more users to schedule their first post within a particular time frame, right? And after we did that, we have seen on this sample that indeed the treatment group, so the people who have seen this experience, right, and were pushed and prompted to schedule their first post, had an over 2 times higher goal completion than the group who didn't see the experience. So this is how we measure ROI of our onboarding experiences. Right. Then another thing you can do at this new user onboarding stage is to optimize your adoption rate with onboarding checklists, right? So checklists are great because they keep people accountable, and your new user not only sees basically the tooltips, the steps they need to complete, but they know upfront how many steps they need to complete to actually activate. I mean, we call it activation from our kind of business perspective. For them, it's basically reaching their goal, right? And as we already know from our customer journey map, their goal is to start scheduling posts. So I will show you the results of an experiment that I did with a checklist with 2 dummy items versus no dummy items. So this is what an onboarding checklist looks like, right? It states these basically key activation points. This is actually a checklist for a slightly different user persona because it's asking them to invite team members. So we already know this is not a solopreneur. This is a person who actually has a team and that has several accounts. So we are also going to ask them to create an account group so they can optimize their posting. Right, and these are the dummies. This is basically employing a psychological phenomenon that's called the Zeigarnik effect. So it's been proven that people tend to remember about the things they haven't completed more than the ones they have completed. But at the same time, having completed certain steps already makes them feel obligated to finish the task, right? So sometimes you probably have this feeling like you're halfway through your to-do list and you're like, oh, I can't, you know, wrap up for the day until I finish because your work ethic will not let you sleep, right? This is probably the Zeigarnik effect at play. So you can read more about these little psychological hacks that can help you optimize your activation metrics. Right, and again, Again, we looked at how these two checklists, so the one without any ticked off dummy objects did versus the one which had dummy objects. Actually, we had a much higher completion rate, which confirmed our hypothesis that if people feel they have already engaged with the tool and they have already done something, they will have a higher completion rate. So that's another example of basically UI pattern you can use at the new user onboarding stage. And then once you have created your new user onboarding and you have tested different variants, you have tested different experiences, you have tested a welcome screen with gamification elements versus with a traditional survey, you have tested a checklist or no checklist, a checklist with 2 dummies versus no dummies, you have optimized everything to get like the best results you can squeeze out of it. What do you do next? Right, you can see the immediate ROI, as I showed you, by running an A/B test and seeing how many people reach the activation point. But what I would also like you to do to kind of get even bigger reward for yourself and for your efforts is to look at how these efforts at each stage of your customer journey affect the user long term. So this is where you need to look at your basically cohort analysis table. Right? How many of you are familiar with cohort analysis? So let me know. Do we need to explain this? Oops. Any ideas? Cohort analysis? Hands up, who knows what a cohort analysis is? All right. Sort of moving this all around here. Cool. Heard of it? Yes. Okay, we have a brilliant definition here. Great. Yes, so basically cohort analysis tracks the new users that join you at a specific point in time. Here we have the months, right? So, sorry for that. Keep doing it. Right. So we have the new users that join you every month, right? So say you launch one experiment or one experience for the new users in August, right? Another one in September, another one in October, and then you track these users across a period of say 12 months, and you see what is the long-term impact of these different experiences on the retention rate in these particular cohorts that were subjected to different experiences, right? So that can give you an idea of how what you're doing in the new user onboarding stage not only affects the activation rates, but also your retention rates. So another metric down the road. So the beautiful thing about treating onboarding as a continuous process is that everything you do at every stage of the user journey ultimately affects something that is happening at another stage of the user journey, sometimes months down the road, right? Because if you effectively onboard a new user, and then you take, for instance, you take the basic user, so the next stage, the one who has already activated, and you don't leave them alone. You start showing them other value driving features, so they become a lot more powerful and they become a lot more effective at getting their jobs done. This will also affect, how many of these users ultimately become power users and advocates for your product. Right, so cohort analysis is a great tool for tracking how anything you add at any point in time affects the whole your entire metrics, basically. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to touch upon the topic of secondary onboarding, right? So this is sort of to debunk one of the myths that I mentioned at the beginning, that onboarding is only for the new users. And as I just said, once the user becomes activated and is kind of a basic user, understands, the main functionalities, there are probably still plenty of things they can discover. And you shouldn't just, leave them to their own devices. Based on their needs, based on their persona and your customer journey map, you should think, what are the features you should show them next, right? So if you see a user who is a busy solopreneur, and if you see from your user analytics tool that they haven't been scheduling enough posts lately, you may start thinking, what are the reasons for that, right? They probably are too busy, they have too many accounts to constantly come up with new content. And in the case of Postfity, they have these two features that basically offer content prompts. So post ideas is like a collection of articles by different categories, by different industries, and social tips calendar. This is like ready-made copy templates they can just slap, into their scheduler and schedule for the days where they have like no ideas what to post, right? So this type of user is the type of user that may need to avail themselves of such functionalities. But let's take another user. Let's take the agency user who has plenty of people working on their posts, and creating copy is not a problem for them at all. But you notice that they are not using certain functionalities like grouping their accounts, right? Which would make their work more efficient. Or maybe they're not using the reuse, recycle posts functionality, which would help them basically schedule the same post several times. Or maybe they are not using the bulk upload, which is not even on the main interface, not even in the main menu. So without knowing where to find the bulk CSV upload, they would probably have a hard time, figuring out that they can make their work more efficient. And they may even think, this tool doesn't have this functionality, and I've heard that another tool has it. They may even churn just because you didn't point them to the right functionality at the right time. It would make no sense to show them the bulk upload on day one, of course, which is what traditional product tours often do. Like, hey, these are our 25 most important features. Like, now, let me take you by the hand and show you everything in 1 minute. I don't care that you won't remember anything afterwards. That's not effective. Right. So secondary onboarding is basically everything that happens past the activation stage, showing your users secondary, tertiary, and new features at the right time, and again, to the right personas. Right. And unfortunately, as with most good things, there is no universal advice here. There's no one size fits all. So, even if I wanted to, I couldn't show you all the possible UI patterns and elements that you can use to create these different experience flows for your users, because there are just like as many of them as there are use cases and personas. right? So you need to figure it out yourself. That's why the customer journey map is a great tool, because instead of offering you a template and, you know, the best practices, it forces you to think, right, what you need to build at every stage of the user journey, at every touch point, to help them resolve their problem and reach their goals faster, right? So just a few ideas here. Okay, let me move that. Right. So for a new user, for the activation stage, I'd recommend you first create a welcome screen with a micro survey, then interactive walkthrough leading to the aha moment or moments, right? So the key 1 to activation points. You want the user to actually hit their goals. So an interactive walkthrough is basically based on custom events, and you only trigger another, you know, step if the previous step has been met, and you know it from your database, basically, because you can see that the user has actually performed this custom event. Then if you want to push your user from the basic user to the advanced user, you are focusing on advanced feature adoption, again, geared to the user persona and their goals and their needs. And this type of onboarding can be more reactive, right? So you actually, at this point, have enough data about your user and their in-app behavior that you can react to what they're doing or not doing, right? So we tend to distinguish between proactive onboarding, when you're like taking the user by the hand and like asking them to do something because you still don't know them really, and reactive, when you just respond to what the user is doing. Right, then at the advanced user stage, you may want to push them to upgrade to the next plan, right? So this is where basically you can show them experiences, prompting them to use certain features that would ultimately make them upgrade, use premium features, for instance, or use certain features that drive product-led growth in your product, that drive you know, expansion revenue more. So say in the case of Postfity, the pricing is based on the number of posts that somebody is scheduling, or the number of accounts that somebody has linked to their profile. So if we see somebody is pre-active, right, but they kind of need like to publish 10 more posts per month in order to have to upgrade to the next plan, we may offer them more help with actually coming up with post ideas, right? Or we may show them the features that would make them more efficient so they can create more posts in a shorter time. So this is exactly why, you know, having all this laid out and in front of you really helps, because you can see, oh, at this point, I will show them this kind of experience, right? And I have a hypothesis that it will lead to them actually upgrading over the next 3 months, right? Cool. This is pretty much bringing me to my conclusion. I wonder if you have any questions. I could probably, you know, talk about it for the next 6 hours and show you all the different UI patterns you can build. But this was sort of just to give you a taste of how customer journey mapping can help you with building your ideal onboarding. I'm very happy to talk to you after this webinar. So if you have any questions or want to discuss, you know, particular ideas that you had after listening to this talk, drop me an email and I will get back to you. We can jump on a call, and yeah. Great to hear from you afterwards.
Yeah,
So,
Emilia, thank you so much for the talk, sharing your view on onboarding and which role customer journey mapping plays here. We'll be now moving on to the Q&A session. Please do save Emilia's email address you see on the slide and reach out to her. And do look for the link on her LinkedIn, because as I mentioned in the comments, her LinkedIn posts are most helpful and always lots of fun. So please do reach out as well.
Thank you, Julia.
And we do have a couple questions already. One is from Yuri, actually. Emilia, firstly, thank you for the presentation. As for the question, what stages of the journey have you seen are the most critical to work on for SaaS businesses to improve onboarding? I know that maybe the answer is all of them might be depending on, but which one of them stand out based on your experience?
I have an opinion. Yeah, actually, I wish I had shown you a certain table with basically the statistics on which stage of the user journey is most important for your revenue. It's very interesting. I will share it with Julia and then she can send it to you in the follow-up email. So actually, it's been found that activation is the most important point in the customer journey. And when you think about it, it's kind of logical, because if your user doesn't activate, if they don't see the value of your product pretty early on, they're probably not going to hang around, right? Why would they? So having said all I've said about secondary onboarding and how it's important not to leave, the users alone, I would say if you're just starting out and you have limited resources, focus on the new user onboarding, make sure they are activated, because without activation, all the other stages just don't happen, right? Cool.
Awesome, thank you. We did have another one about the pop-ups. You mentioned August here asked, do pop-ups run the risk of banner blindness?
They do. Yeah, they definitely do. And that's why sometimes you may want to limit the number of pop-ups you create and use other UI patterns, for instance, native tooltips, right? Especially for secondary onboarding, where the user is already kind of confident and they are just moving around. You can drop these little icons like an eye icon for more information or a question mark icon on certain elements in your UI. And then when the user hovers over them, they will get the explanation. This doesn't work for hidden features though. So if you have a feature like I mentioned with the bulk uploads, for instance, that is not on your dashboard, right? That is somewhere in the settings. Then you may need to create a slide out, right? That points the user to this advanced hidden feature. But yeah, I totally agree. Banner blindness can happen. And that's also why it's so important to use custom events, because then you can only show the banners and the pop-ups to the people who really need to see them. And you know that they have completed the previous step, so they wouldn't be redundant. Cool.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Randy here. Is there a good source to look at more of these onboarding patterns?
Yes, so we have them in a lot of our blogs, so I can share some with you. I already shared 2 URLs where we kind of compiled the whole product adoption strategy in one place. We also have an email course that's called Product Adoption School. You can sign up to it on Userpilot website. But personally, I will give you kind of a sneaky peek into what we are planning. We're planning to create a library of different UI patterns for different stages of the user journey that will probably come in a few months' time. But yeah, I will keep Julia posted and then she can tell you about it.
Thank you so much. I did post the link to the Userpilot blog in the chat, so
awesome.
Check it out. Edina has another question. How many questions is best to ask in the welcome screen? How many are too much from your experience?
Again, the best answer is it depends. It depends on how much you need to find out about your user to create an effective onboarding flow, right? I would say, generally speaking, you need to find out about their goals, right? So what they want to achieve. This is even more important than who they are, right? But sometimes you may need to know more information, as in the case of email marketing tool that I mentioned. You may want to ask about their previous experience with similar tools, right? and if they have a particular asset that is critical for activation, or do you need to help them create this asset, like an email list first, right? So obviously, if somebody wanted to use an email marketing tool without an email list, right, we need to point them to how to create one first.
Great, Adina, I hope that answers your question. And we've got time for one more, and this one is from Lorena. What are your thoughts on sending post-onboarding surveys?
Post-onboarding surveys, and what kind of surveys specifically would you have in mind? Like satisfaction with the onboarding process or something else?
Yes, I see yes in the chat.
Okay, satisfaction about the onboarding journey. Yeah, I would say this is something that is not used very often, but could definitely give you insights into how the users are feeling about your onboarding. You can see from all the analytics tools, from experiments or A/B tests, you can see what they did or what they didn't, and how much more of your users are reaching the goals after you have created a certain experience. But that doesn't tell you about how they felt about it, right? Overall, you may want to be conservative about it. So if you feel like you're asking your users a lot of questions and you've subjected them to a lot of different experiences, then maybe adding this extra survey will frustrate them and annoy them, and maybe that's when you want to kind of take a break, give them a break, and just look at your data, right? So again, it's a very subjective matter, right?